moving on from Dropbox's breach to a tool and technique that I saw in the last month that I found this really interesting. There was a report of a group called Cranefly compromising systems, dropping malware on IIS servers. And it wasn't really the malware that I found particularly interesting. Like the end goal, if you like, wasn't particularly interesting. It was the same sort of end goal that most people have when they compromise a system. What I found interesting was the control channel that the attackers were using. And what was happening was, so a piece of malware is being dropped on the IIS server via some initial compromise, right? That would be like a vulnerable file upload or something along those lines. When that malware is executed, rather than opening like an outbound channel to talk to a C2 server, or making any kind of outbound request to get its instructions on what to do next, it actually just starts reading the IIS logs on the local machine. And then the attacker sends the commands to pass to that malware in what look for all the world like regular requests to your web server. And those requests contain specific code words. Those code words make the malware wake up and pay attention to that log entry and then pass out its command from the logs. The next stage for this in the actual compromise, I think, was to drop other malware. I just thought that was very neat. Like no outbound connections for your outbound inspection to key off of. Nothing inbound other than like GET requests that you expect to see anyway on a web server. It was really subtle.
Very elegant, yeah.
I love it. That's really, really nice. I mean, that's somebody put a fair amount of thought into that, and I appreciate it. Especially since increasingly, right, outbound traffic or IOCs regarding and the really great thing about that particular approach is that you could literally send your commands to that malware from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right, via either another compromised host or a proxy or something else like that, and that has some legs. I'm expecting to see that technique used again for sure. There's some definite advantages there.
It sort of reminds me of the DNS CNC attacks that we saw in the past, where you'd receive the command via a DNS query. That for whatever reason, this really makes my mind go right there.
It's it's really nice. It wasn't one I'd seen before, and I mean this specific TTP is probably burnt at this point on the basis that it's been written about on the internet. But if you do happen to see, there are 3 4-letter strings: WRDE, EXCO, and CLLO, like in your IIS logs. That's an indicator that you're being targeted by this particular group and this particular technique. I fully expect, unless there's some low-value actor out there who's just taking the existing malware and like sending it wherever, and that happens all the time, right? Stuff that gets weaponized by Mirai is the same exploits over and over and over again. They don't care where they send it or what really happens to it. Drop a Bitcoin miner, move on. I fully expect that like this group, whoever came up with this, will modify those strings, will modify their approach slightly, but the general approach of reading the log files is just, it's beautiful.
Exactly.
So I mean, like, what's the fix going to look like? Are we all going to have to start validating that stuff as well? Where do you start with that?
Well, I will say that on a Linux machine, at least by default, a non-privileged process probably isn't going to be able to read the logs.
Right.
So
that is true.
So there's that. There's that approach. I'm not enough of a Windows person to be able to say if a piece of malware that was either running standalone or as a child process of IIS, whether or not it would need or inherent rights to read log files. Clearly, there's in this case it did, but I'm not sure if turning that off would break anything. Yeah, I don't know, but
Yeah,
I find myself wondering if central logging would be a good fix for this rather than keeping your logs on box. Ship them off before they even hit your disk, you know? To me, that would seem like a great way to get by this, although I don't know.
off-box.
yeah,
I don't-
Yeah, it's, as long as it's not running a vulnerable Log4j instance.
Indeed.
Otherwise, you just blow off at the other foot. I think probably the easiest way of tackling this is going to be like the behavioral analysis on the host itself. What processes are running? What files are they looking at? That's the kind of thing that like ThreatStack looks at. So it's rather than looking at what is coming into the box, you're looking at what the box is doing. So you know what it normally does. You know what services normally run on the box. In this case, the dropper, the first stage is Python. So some Python script starts up and starts reading IIS logs. Should ring alarm bells, right? Unless you happen to use Python to read your IIS logs, in which case, you know, it's a new script. It's got to ring some alarm bells. That's probably the easiest way of spotting this. It's not going to stop it, and actually stopping that inbound C2 channel, like preventing outbound C2 channels, is real easy, but stopping inbound, that's a game of whack-a-mole, whatever way you cut it.
I'm continually coming back to the idea of that I think, honestly, I think I've discredited this for myself at least. But you know, the proper approach here is to whitelist every possible URL, you know, that you have, you know, and then implement that at some layer ahead of your actual web server and block anything that doesn't match it. And yeah, that would stop this, but also that is such an enormous pile of work. And so absolutely difficult, right? And unfortunately, I think that many, not to actually denigrate this approach in any way. If you have the resources to do it, it's great. But that kind of precise TTP finding, where you have, well, this is a Python process and it's reading web, you know, IIS log files, that looks weird. Like, if you can do that at scale, I that's awesome. But it is similarly difficult. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For much the same reasons, is that you need to have some sort of a baseline profile of what normal is, right? And that's hard to do. Not impossible, certainly, but it is a tricky thing.
Sure.
Is there some approach that we could take that would make this kind of threat easier to mitigate or stop it entirely? I don't know. We mentioned, you know, locking down your log files or logging off box exclusively and not having any local ones. The ramifications of that may be extending further than I can see. So yeah, it's. I guess I'm not really saying too much other than, geez, this stuff is hard.
I'm starting to think we're not going to solve it today.
No,